I'm Rodger Citron, and I'm a professor at Touro University, Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center. And our guest today on the Touro Law Review podcast is Reyna Marder Gentin. And she is a former lawyer, as we're going to discuss, and she's also a successful novelist. And let's start, as we always do at the beginning here, Reyna. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I prefer recovering attorney because I think that once you're an attorney, you're always an attorney. So that's just my plug for that. But I am now spending my time writing. I'm coming to you from New Rochelle, New York. That's my kitchen in the background. And I don't know, just biographically, I'm married to another attorney. He was my high school sweetheart. He likes to tell people that he was the captain of the football team and I was the head cheerleader. But if you knew us, you would know that was not likely. And in fact, we met in the orchestra. So a whole different type of person. And we have 2 children. They are both out of the house now, and gives me time to write.
You know, I have to confess that when I was reading one of your books on vacation with my wife's family, I told her older sister, and I included, of course, what you just said from your website, which is, oh, you know, so interesting. Her husband, captain of the football team, and she was head cheerleader. She goes, seriously? I go, no, that's all.
No, that's a joke.
I go, it's just a good joke. She has a sense of humor. And then she laughed. She got it.
Good. Okay.
I'm also thinking, you know, I appreciate your candor about the background setting. Our kitchen is behind us. And of course, I like the fact that it's a Friday afternoon and this is a relatively informal setting for the conversation.
Right.
So why did you go to law school?
So, you know, I'm wondering whether, I know you said that sometimes you ask your students that, why they went to law school. And from the young people that I've had a chance to meet with through writing these books and going to law schools and presenting the books, I find that they are far more strategic than I ever was. I don't know if this is just a generational thing that, you know, 30 something years ago, you could go to law school just because you were kind of a good humanities student, but that was definitely where I was at. I didn't know any lawyers. I had no lawyers in the family. I had very little idea of what sort of law I would want to practice once I got out of law school. So yeah, it was one of those things I kind of fell into, and I think you'll probably see that a little bit of a theme in your later questions, because I tend to go into things, you know, just hopefully with my mind and my eyes open, but not necessarily knowing what's going to happen next. And I don't think that's a bad way to go through your career or your life, really. So
yes, no, so my father was an attorney, and he certainly had a very strong influence, you could say, about that. But I was in a similar situation, and the rationalization was, well, I can still do anything.
Right.
And I feel like that was very much a real theme in our generation.
Right.
You know, you can still do anything. You don't
Right.
have to be a lawyer.
Right. But less so now, right? I think when I talk to kids now, they seem to know already where they want to work before they've started school. I don't know. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, you know, the answer that the perpetual answer in law school, I would say from my experience with the students at Touro, is yes and no. Some have it figured out, and some it's the journey's just beginning.
Right.
And absolutely, there is no correct answer here. I you know, I'm saying it on the recording, you know, on the podcast, because I say it to the students and it's really true. Still, and whatever the connective phrase here is, you did become an attorney. In fact, you became a public defender. And how did that happen?
So I started out after law school at a big law firm, and it was very clearly not for me from about day one. And, and I was pretty sure it wouldn't be for me when I went. But speaking of fathers, my father said, listen, maybe you might like a job where you make some money. And I thought, oh, I could try that. And I did. And for me, honestly, it was not a good fit at all. Luckily, I had applied for a clerkship to start a year later. So I had kind of a graceful exit after a year at the law firm. And I went to clerk, and then I went to legal aid straight from there. At legal aid, I was doing more juvenile rights work. I was a law guardian. I did that for 3 years and then switched to doing criminal appeals for adults. And again, it's just kind of the way things panned out. I had done a 1-year appellate rotation from the juvenile rights division. And then when that was over, I thought that I was rotating back into my office in Manhattan, and they wanted to send me to another borough, and I didn't want to go. And I left and, got this new job. So, just keeping your eyes open, as I say, and being open to trying new things.
Yeah. Was all of this, that is the big firm and the clerkship and so on, and then working at legal aid, I just want to be clear, that was all in New York.
All in New York.
All
Yes.
in New York. And when you were at legal aid, was that all in Manhattan?
I was in Manhattan. Yes.
Mhm.
The appellate year, we did first and second department cases. So we were a little more branched out, but yeah.
And is that doing the appellate work? Is that what you did, subsequently and for really most of the
Yes,
time as a defender?
I did. I was there for 18 years, almost 18 years. And yeah, it was a great job. I mean, it's every job has pros and cons, right? For me, temperamentally, it really suited me. I liked the quietness of it. I liked the collegiality. We had a very nice group of people in the office, people that, really have become and stayed friends. And it was, not, I don't want to say it was like being on law review. I was never a law review person, but the work itself was that kind of research and writing. And obviously we argued the cases in court, but our court appearances were fairly few and far between. So, it's a certain type of mindset and a certain type of stress, but different from other kinds of stress. So for me, it suited me.
And I'm just curious, if I can go back just to the experience at the law firm.
Sure.
And too frazzled, sort of, was that it, or or was it, no, I really don't like making a lot of money?
No, the money was good. I was newly married. My husband was still in law school. So for me, the money was good. It allowed us to, pay the rent and support ourselves. To be honest, I didn't like the subject matter. I was in litigation, but I just didn't feel that the commercial stuff appealed to me. I just wasn't interested in it. So it was partially that. And then I would say it was a large part that sense of lack of control, that feeling that the partner could call you at 6 p.m. and all of a sudden you were expected to be there all night doing some assignment. And I'm just not that kind of person. I keep regular hours. I sleep regular hours. I eat regular hours. Like it just wasn't for me. It made me very nervous.
And for some people, and really this is reflected in your first novel, that is, some of what we're talking about sounds very familiar. And yet for some people, it's the only game in town. It's so exciting. And the idea of you might be gone for a week, and putting in 100 hours in some city that you've never been to before, is thrilling, and exciting. And from your, from the firm, anyone there who you started with who's still there?
Very few. I got to go back. It was actually wild. I can name the firm because it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with the firm. It had to do with me. But it was I was at Debevoise and Plimpton, where numerous of our classmates went when we graduated law school, and I got to go back with the first book and do a book group. there with the litigation department. And, it was wild. Like I had not been back, it was ever, whatever it was, 25 years or something. And I actually brought with me, I had, I don't know if they do this anymore. I'm sure they don't, but they gave out when we were summer associates, like a pamphlet with everybody's picture and a little bio of them, right? I guess that's all very outdated now, but I still had mine and I brought it with me and I showed these, everybody thought it was hilarious, but it was, I knew one woman was now, I believe, the head of the litigation department. She had started with me, and a couple of other people. But listen, that was 30 years ago, right? So it's normal for people to move around. It would be abnormal if large quantities of my class were still there, I think. So
Yeah, but it's always fascinating, like to see who
makes it, right?
see who completes the marathon.
Right.
My best friend from high school is still at the same firm.
Wow.
And he's done, he's held every important position in the firm in terms of committees and done fascinating cases. And it's, I joke with him, I go, you're the weird one.
Yeah.
I go,
It's true.
So and then and can I ask this about your experience as a public defender? Did you enjoy oral argument?
I did. I love oral argument. And it's surprising because it doesn't sound like it would go in with my personality because people are asking you questions, and as prepared as you are, you're going to get asked something that you haven't thought about. But I was always extremely well prepared, if I can say that. And yeah, and much more forcefully presenting than I would give myself credit for. But yeah, and I got to go, it was a great job. I mean, I got to go up to the Court of Appeals twice on 2 of my cases, in Albany, which was fantastic. And, and I would compare myself to friends and, colleagues at law firms, and they were not arguing their cases in the Court of Appeals. It didn't matter, I mean, they would maybe if they were still there now, but, as a whatever 30-year-old, they were not going to, do that. So.
Yes. I did a stint at the FCC as an appellate lawyer, and it's there in my reunion statement, for the 25th reunion that I got to argue in the DC circuit a number of times.
All right.
There was even one day, this is before he even became a judge on the DC circuit, I got to see John Roberts argue a case as an attorney, and
wow,
that was humbling.
Yeah. Sure.
Because he didn't even use all his time. He didn't need to.
Wow.
He not only did he answer the questions, he was so clearly respected that he had nothing more to say.
Yeah, he knew when to sit down. That's also a skill.
And he sat down, and then when I got up, it sort of seemed like it was like turning the dial on the radio and the static came on.
No, I'm sure not.
So, and then so you were 18 years, which meant that you were about 20 years out of school by the time when you left the defender's
no,
office?
because I was a legal aid for 3 years and I clerked and I was a Debevoise. So it was probably 25. Yeah, I don't know. That was a long time. By the time I left, I had been practicing altogether 23 years. So
okay, that's obviously you can see why they don't have me teaching contracts name. We have trouble with the numbers there.
Math.
But it's sort of a two-part question, but I think it's headed in the same direction, which is, why did you leave? But then the second part is, what was the relationship to writing? That is, you becoming really a professional writer. That is, writing these novels and so on. And just, how did that play out?
I actually think there is a connection, and it's a connection that I've started to understand more as the years have gone by. But when I left, it was called Appellate Advocates, where I was. I definitely had hit a little bit of I don't want to say a total burnout. It wasn't quite that bad, but writing criminal appeals is very much about storytelling. And, obviously you need a legal issue. That's what you're briefing, but a lot of it is how you frame things and how you make the defendant look and how you try to present some side of the story that is going to attract the judge's attention and the judge's feeling that maybe this person has something redemptive about them that they need to sit up and notice. And, I felt like I did it really well for a long time. And then I kind of got to a point where I was having trouble telling the story. And, I would say I got to a point, one of the last cases I had was a case where a man was accused of manslaughter in the death of his 2-year-old stepson. And, it was a hideously upsetting case on every level. I had never had a child victim case before. And even though he wasn't accused of an intentional crime, it had not been intentional. It was horrific. And I kept reading this case, and obviously you're looking for a legal issue. You need a legal issue, but I couldn't find one. But apart from not being able to find a legal issue, I just couldn't get my heart in the right place to be saying, this is what I'm doing. I just couldn't find, not that he was like evil incarnate or something, but I just couldn't tell the story for him. And in the end, and when working for a public defender's office, there's no saying to your supervisor, like, reassign this case to somebody else. I can't do this. I mean, you get what you get, and that's it. And, and everybody's got the same horrific cases, and you do it. And in the end, I went and I said, listen, the only thing I can see to raise for him is a sentencing issue. I can say that he got too much time, because you can really say that about almost anyone, right? You can come up with something to say to show that, maybe he got a raw deal. And they didn't like us to raise that, certainly not as the primary issue, because that's a tell, right? I mean, the court looks at that and they say they had nothing to brief for this person, and I had nothing to brief for him. And I finished that case, and I just thought, what, I've done my share here. This is, it's an important job. Being a defense attorney, I think, is a critical job. It's critical to the system. But now it's time for someone else to do it and me to get out. And to be honest, I quit without having any idea what I was going to do. And I know, most people are not in that position to have the luxury financially to do that. I luckily did. My spouse was working, and I didn't have to worry about getting another job right away. And I started to think, like, what do I want to do with myself? And I spent a lot of time kind of doing those things that you do when all of a sudden you have time, right? Like, I don't know, I signed up for piano lessons. I signed up for yoga lessons. You're trying all sorts of things. And then a friend of mine said she was taking a class at Sarah Lawrence, which is not far from me, a writing class, and did I want to come? And I said no at first, because I figured I know how to write. I've been writing for 25 years. And she said, no, I'm taking this memoir class. And I said, okay, I'm definitely not going to the memoir class, because I'm not writing a memoir. I'm not, I don't have that kind of life. But she said, come see it. And I went with her, and it really changed my life. I went in there, and I pretty quickly learned that writing memoir is not necessarily about writing your life story. It's about writing the small moments and writing about the relationships and figuring out how to make them relatable to other people. And, that's where the writing started, and it kind of took off from there.
Going back to, your decision to leave the appellate advocacy job, or the appellate position. I don't know if you ever had Steve Duke for anything in law school.
I did. I think I had him for criminal law. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So, and I asked because, I got to know him a little bit at law school, and certainly talked about, he used to litigate cases as an appellate attorney doing defense work. And I remember he said something along the lines of, you're going to lose a lot from this position, or from this perspective. And I think that, especially since a lot of the work that he was doing was federal, he'd sort of noticed, at least in his own experience, greater reliance on the idea of, well, yes, it was harmless error. That is, and the conviction's still going to get affirmed.
Right.
And he's certainly, from the generation older than us. And so it very well may have been that what he was seeing was just simply a reflection of the way in which the courts were deciding these cases, how that had changed in his lifetime. But the question was, how did you handle that piece, knowing that, I don't know what the statistics are, but certainly more than half of the time.
Oh, much, much more than half of the
Yeah.
time. Much more. I didn't have a problem so much with that. I mean, you do go into it expecting mostly to lose, right? I mean, if the system is working at all, you should mostly lose your appeals. I mean, the ones that were painful were the ones where you knew you were right and you still lost your appeal, like you're saying, the harmless error, and and those were hard to deal with. I think the thing I found more difficult to deal with, honestly, was that when you're doing appeals, you're working with a closed record, and a, a lot about the moment of the crime, right? And then like a little bit about what happened before, maybe, and a little bit about what happened after, but you don't really ever have the whole story. And to me, these people that are committing these crimes, like, do sometimes people commit crimes just out of, I don't know, out of convenience or out of a momentary loss of judgment? Yes. But to me, probably the vast majority of crimes are committed in the context of something, right? There things happened before. Things happened in their home life. Things happened in their school life. Things happened in their professional life. I mean, there's all sorts of things, I think, that lead up to that moment when they made the terrible judgment and did the terrible thing. And not knowing that stuff, not that I would want to know it in the sense of, like, if you're actually doing this job, you can't know all that stuff, right? It would just be overwhelming. But the fiction really, I found, allowed me to create those answers for myself. And even though I know that they're not real answers, I could delve into it a little bit more. I mean, I know you finished, in the first book, there's a sex crime, and the question runs through the whole book, is he innocent or is he not innocent? And to me, the stuff about whether, what was his first love like, or what was his, how was he raised, or did he get to go to school, or what, all those things, I could play them out now in the fiction and kind of give myself a better sense of why the person might do what they do. And, and that obviously you can't do in real life. So that was part of the attraction, I think.
It did, whether in law school or at any other time, maybe even in connection with your writing. Have you ever done anything in the law and literature realm? Read any of that? Law reviews, or occasionally there's a book that comes out. Someone will do a book, and I ask because you're really talking about this in a way that is about narrative,
right?
And context, and what you're saying really resonates with those people who sort of make the case for law and literature, that its importance, in law school or in the curriculum or that kind of thing. That is, the need to be able to empathize,
Sure.
the importance of context, and then even, because some people take the idea of the importance of, this is my paraphrase, like narrative coherence, in a way that is so, and I've had friends who served on juries who have sort of said, I'm not sure anyone here is really telling the truth, or certainly the entire truth. And what are we supposed to do about that? Or what was I, as a juror, what was I supposed to do about that kind of thing? So, no,
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I think part of it is that you don't know. It's hard to know how far to take it. Like I remember my husband actually was at law school at Columbia, but he did a year with us at Yale, and he took a class with Professor Wheeler. And I remember there was a whole thing about I think they called it the RSB, the rotten social background, and like whether that really needs to play into what people understand about these cases. Do you really need to know all this background stuff about the person, and how does that affect whether they're liable for their actions or not? And and part of you feels like, no, like it shouldn't, like that, why are we looking at that? Maybe that's not the way to go. And then part of me feels like, what, there's definitely some truth in that, to know what people, where they came from and what's happening. And yeah, I think it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny, I know this is we're kind of freelancing here, so but if you'll indulge me, I'll go big. What do you think about the adversarial system, or how is your experience, or how did your experience as a lawyer, and then perhaps as a writer as well, did your thinking about the adversarial system at all change? Because right, the premise is, oh, there's competing narratives and each side tries to, tell the strongest version of its story. And supposedly, right, the truth will emerge. And of course, that's not the only way to do it. And I wonder, if you have thoughts about that, now that you're at this point of, decades after law school and so on.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think for the most part, for me, the system works, and it does work in that way of sussing out the truth from various perspectives. But then you have to keep in mind in all the ways that it doesn't work, and it doesn't work in such huge ways with regard to, who gets arrested and who's getting searched and who's, obviously all the racial issues that underlie so many problems in the country and certainly within the system as well. So I think it's very hard to square everything and, make some global statement about what works and what doesn't work. I think it's I think it's probably the best system around, but whether it's always going to work and always going to get at the actual truth, who knows?
So you've not just hung up your shingle, you've turned in your shingle, and then you began writing. And actually, with the novels, since I just finished Unreasonable Doubts most recently, and it seems to really be the perfect sort of transition. And it seems like it was that for you, that some of the things we've been talking about made their way in one way or another into the novel. So can you tell us a little bit about, I think quite literally how you wrote the novel and what that was like?
So you're right. I mean, it was very cathartic for me to write the novel. I started it not long after I had quit my job. And although, the quitting was of my own volition, I had a lot of mixed emotions, and I had a lot of, there was some amount of anger about the way things had gone down and whatever. And, definitely a number of the first, I would say the first and second draft of the book had a more angry tenor that I had to kind of tone down because, obviously it wasn't about me and it wasn't about exactly where I had worked, but a lot of it is in there. And I think that was part of the strength of the book. I think a lot of people writing a first book will end up writing something that is very close to something that they know. And I think there's reason for that. I mean, it makes it credible. And I had a lot of subject matter. I had a lot of, things in there that I wanted to get out. And not even just the law stuff. I mean, I had a good friend who was my colleague who had passed away, and I very much wanted to weave that into the book. And I felt like I was able to do it in a way that really paid tribute to her. And a lot of my colleagues read the book afterwards and were very moved to see that whole storyline in there. So, there were a lot of things that I was interested in that I think came out in the book. The case itself that was in the book was a case that I did have on appeal. Obviously I changed the facts so as not to expose anyone. And it was much more ambiguous in the book than it was in real life. The case had to do with a DNA. It was basically a DNA case on a rape trial. And in real life, the client had been previously convicted of rape, and that prior DNA test also came in before the jury. So it deprived him of a due process and a fair trial, because there's just no way a jury seeing that is not going to also assume that he committed rape. In this case, if he became a serial rapist instead of being tried on one case. In the book, I softened that a bit so that you weren't sure whether he had in fact been convicted previously of that. But so that, and that was interesting to me. It was interesting to see how I could write it and how I could add to the story and make him a fuller character, because obviously in real life, when I represented him, I know nothing about him except that he's, what he's been convicted of and what happened that day and night and whatever. But, so that was interesting to me to kind of weave in his prior love stories and his, his family background. So I took a class, when I took this memoir class, I was writing very short pieces of memoir, and I took it for a whole year, and I wrote quite a bit about my job, but I also wrote about my mother, or I wrote about a rabbi I had lost, who had perished in a fire in my congregation. And when I was finished, I had all these pieces, and I thought, well, maybe I can turn this into a novel. And that's what happened. I kind of figured out how to string them together and make something larger out of it.
If I can ask, because the protagonist in the novel is young or younger,
Right.
I guess about, yeah,
She's
30,
30.
of course,
Yeah.
I would.
Yes. Much younger than I am. Yes.
Um, and to have her go through losing a friend who is about the same age, at least if I remember that correctly, or I have to say, reading the book now, and let's just say that, north of 50, really, in other words, in some ways that may have been the hardest part of the book, to see someone so young
Right.
die, and how the older you get, the more unfair that I think you bring to that, the unfairness of how can that ever, how can that happen? I mean, as an emotional response
Right. Of
to
course.
someone that age. And so if I can ask, did that roughly accord with your experience of that, or that was something that, based upon what happened when you were a bit older, but you sort
Right.
of reconstructed that, if you will,
Right. I did.
reworked that to fit it into that age?
Right. That's definitely what happened. She was 50 when she passed away, which to me is still way too young.
Yeah.
And she and I were about the same age when it happened. Maybe I was a little bit younger. So yeah, I did change those facts. But as you know, like when you're going through something, it's often the proximity of the age to your age that is so shocking. I mean, yes, it would have been shocking had she been 30, of course. And in the book, I made her having a 2-year-old child, and in fact, he was 18 when she passed away. But yeah, so I did kind of reconstruct, as you say.
And I don't want to give too much away in the novel, but have you ever thought about coming back to, the central character, and where are they now?
Yeah, people ask about a sequel. I haven't. I kind of feel like, I don't know. I always feel like I need to do something new. I'm not so good at that. So
Yeah, no, I applaud you, because of course the sequel is, it's what our culture is all about,
right.
or so it seems. But you leave them in an interesting place. But there's also a sense that I don't think you were doing this, to set up a sequel, but the story by no means is the story completely conclusively wrapped up. And I just thought it was kind of intriguing to see, like, where might they be nowadays,
Right.
or something like that. The next. Oh, and so actually, just to ask this one question, from that, so you did win this appeal,
Yes,
the one that was
I did.
sort
I
of
won
reworked
him
for
a new trial, and then he had the new trial and got convicted of everything all over again and got the same sentence. So that's also the frustrating part about doing. I mean, again, because the system works. Like there was absolutely no reason this man should not have been convicted of rape. The fact that he had something unfair go on in his first trial, okay, then he gets a do-over, but he's still convicted of rape, and as he should be. So that kind of thing didn't bother me. I mean, it's a lot of work. You feel like you've done all this work and then nothing in the end actually happens, but
yeah. I had a comparable experience as a law clerk, but it would take too long, so to run through it. So I'll spare you and our listeners. The and then just sort of picking up on, doing something different. What was your next novel? And how did you come to that?
So I actually wrote a middle grade novel after that. I don't know if you saw that in your research of me.
Just the title. In other words, I never
Okay,
picked up the
so
book or saw
let me
it.
give it a
Yeah,
2-minute plug just because
please.
I happen to love the book, and because of COVID, it's been difficult to get it out because I really need to be in schools and libraries, and nobody's letting anybody in. But it's a middle grade novel about a girl with undiagnosed dyslexia, and she's just got a tremendous amount on her plate. But then she gets assigned to a new English teacher that's new to the school, that doesn't have a lot of preconceived notions about her, and he realizes she's capable of more. And it goes through, kind of how frustrating such a issue can be for a young teen, and has, bullying involved and all sorts of stuff. And then she, without giving away too much, she has a kind of a juvenile delinquency moment. Your cry for help juvenile delinquency moment, and then it turns up from there. So
Yeah, I will say that because I saw Rena Seplowitz, who of course I work with, and I know that Rena listened to it on
oh, did you listen to
the audio, I
oh,
believe.
that's awesome.
She
Okay.
said, and she really liked it.
Oh, I'm glad.
So if you ever get to go on tour, bring Rena with you.
Yeah, I will.
Did and and sort of, you've been a lawyer, you wrote your first lawyer novel. Was part of it, I'm definitely, in other words, I want to be 180 degrees away.
A little bit. I mean, I had written the first book. I was waiting for it to be published because everything just takes forever. So it was with the publisher for like a year. So I had no idea, like, do I have another book in me, or is this it? Because what this was just like a, cathartic moment, getting that job out of my system. So I was glad I took another class. I take a lot of classes. I'm a big believer in that. And I really went in with no idea at all what I wanted to write. But the other thing is that I had deadlines, and I had paid my money. And, if somebody gives me a deadline and tells me you got to have 10 pages or you're wasting everybody's time, then I do it. And I pretty much wrote a chapter a week over the year. And, by the end, I had a pretty good draft of that. So.
And I didn't look, same publisher?
Different publisher. I've been with 3 different publishers. That's another story altogether. But,
and then you came back to the law for Both Are True,
Yeah.
which is the one I started with.
Okay.
And the central character is a family court judge. And how much really, I guess the question is, and I hate to be such a sort of literalist about this kind of thing, but what, how did you research that? It sounds like, of course, you had practiced for literally a number of years in front of family court judges. Did you do anything more than draw on your own experience?
Not really. I mean, I had practiced for 3 years in front of family court judges with legal aid. And then when I quit my appellate job, I actually had been volunteering with a PACE law school clinic and family court up here in White Plains. I did it for about 5 years. So I kind of felt like I had a good feel of what kinds of cases they saw and what kinds of personalities went into it. And, the main character, Jackie, she has no real family experience. She doesn't have experience in the legal sense, but nor is she married or with children or have a lot of that kind of experience. And, I remember thinking when I was a law guardian that it would be a really hard job both ways. It would be a hard job as a lawyer, as a judge, if you had no experience of that. And it was also a hard job as a law guardian, I thought, if you had children. I felt like that would be, some of the things I saw as a law guardian, I wasn't sure how I would have reacted to emotionally if I had been a mother at the time. And I wasn't. I was newly married, but I didn't have children yet. And, that was kind of what went into the Jackie character. Like, what would this be like for somebody who's has to make these huge decisions about other people's families and doesn't really have a day-to-day experience of what that's like, living it. So.
Yeah. And from your practice experience, what's your sense of, if you will, what it takes to be a family court judge? it seems like, since there's a possibility of, it's going to be extremely demanding, emotionally as well as, intellectually, and with the caseload as well, just the volume of work as well too. So it's not clear that, having a family or not having a family, uh, makes one more qualified to
Right.
do it. What's your sense of the judges who impressed you? What did they do well, or how did they handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's somehow maintaining your humility. Whether you have children, don't have children, know the, law, don't know the law. It's a, matter of kind of taking it slow and really trying to listen to what people are saying. In some ways, like when I was, doing this TRO stuff, that's what we did with the PACE Law Clinic. We get temporary TROs. That is the temporaries, and that's the T, restraining orders for people who were victims of domestic violence. And sometimes I would go in front of a judge and I would think like, unless you're talking about the strongest remedy of removing the perpetrator from the home, if you're not talking about that, if what you're talking about is what they called a stay away order, or I want to say it was like a cease and desist. It wasn't exactly that. I can't remember the exact terminology, but if you're talking about anything other than actually removing the person from their own home, just grant it. Like, do you really want to take the chance of like something happening to this woman when she walks out of the courtroom? And that went into one of the scenes in the book, because Jackie, not knowing, that's the main character, not knowing that much about the whole area of domestic violence, she underestimated the lethality of something. And I just think like, wow, how do you do that as a judge and live with yourself? And it happens quite often. I mean, I don't want to say it happens quite often, like the person ends up getting killed. No, God forbid. But it does happen, where they don't grant the relief and something bad happens to the person. And you just think like, what would it have taken to like, it's temporary relief. It's a week. Like, what's it, I don't know. So to me, there's like a little like realpolitik or something that needs to go into their decisions. Like they need to understand what's really going on, and they need to try to take the time to understand it. Like the judges that don't take the time to really understand what's happening, I think get into trouble. And, I definitely had experiences in family court in Manhattan. I mean, not to name names, but I used to appear before Judge Judy when she was just Judge Judy in the family court, and very bright woman, but like she was very concerned with her own, you can tell from her TV show. I mean, it's basically a cult mentality, very concerned with her own, how she was coming across, and getting things done, and getting things done quickly, and getting the next case. And, she didn't care if you were still opening the file to try to figure out, because the law guardians were notoriously swamped. And, you'd walk into the, courtroom with 10 files, and you're still trying to figure out which case you're even appearing on. And she's already made the decision, and you're out, you're out the door. And to me, that kind of mentality, has no place in family court. I mean, I know there's a great volume, and I know that they have to get through things, but these things are complicated, and to me, they have to take their time.
Did you find judges who, despite the volume, were really, yeah, this is how I'm going to say it. It's one case at a time, and we don't do that. We don't call the next one until there's a sense of this has been properly heard or sufficiently heard.
For sure. And judges that were very, very thorough. And, I didn't see them so much up here in Westchester, because I was only going in on the restraining orders, and those, are still relatively straightforward, and, and they're temporary. As I say, they're week-long orders. And then we would hand it over to another organization that would do the restraining order, the permanent restraining order. But, definitely in Manhattan, there were judges that really, they were serious. They were serious about the law, and they were serious about the facts. And they appreciated the law guardians who were on the same page with them, who really wanted to tell them, this is actually what's happening here. This is not, you can't smooth over what's happening here, because you need to know. And, and those were the ones definitely that I preferred to appear before.
I realized I should have perhaps asked this earlier, but it's never too late on a podcast. Can you just tell us a little bit about, really just sort of explain what a law guardian is and what you did? Because I feel like, we may have some students listening here who are interested in family law, and it seems like this is very much the type of job that, one could do or seek to get after law school. So just, you could say, just describe that a little bit, just so that we have a more of an understanding of what that entails.
For sure. It's a great job. I think it is somewhat different now. That's my understanding than when I was a law guardian. When I was a law guardian, we handled a great array of cases. We did both the juvenile delinquency cases, the abuse and neglect cases, the termination of parental rights cases. We did everything. We were appointed to represent the child. So there was always somebody else, there was either the New York City Law Department was the prosecutor, or there were 18B attorneys representing the parents. So there were other people involved that were going to get the information before the judge, but we were the ones that were both supposed to kind of make a recommendation based on the best interest of the child, but also, even more importantly, get in front of the judge and tell them what the children wanted. And what the children wanted was often not in their best interests. In the abuse and neglect cases, nearly every child wants to go home. And that's often not the answer. But that was our job. That was our job, to explain to the judge, we know that there's all this stuff going on. I'm telling you, my client wants to go home. And on the delinquency cases, it was more like a straightforward kind of mini criminal case. I mean, they're not jury trials, they're bench trials. So there's a lot less, there are less legal issues because there are not juries. But it's a great way to also just to cut your teeth on that, if that's something that you're interested in, to be in front of the judge and doing a trial. You are doing trials, and you have to know all your rules of evidence and everything else. So I think I thought it was a great job. I really enjoyed it.
And in contrast to the sort of monastic aspect of being an appellate attorney, there you were day in and day out, real people, real clients. And it sounds like, I don't want to, or I'll ask, it seems like it was very satisfying to you. And was that true?
It was very satisfying. It was very much, why in the end I had decided to go to law school. I had done a summer job, actually in a psych unit at a hospital, where they were doing research on kids that had been abused and neglected. And I thought that was interesting. And, at the time I was a little bit pre-med, but, afterwards I came out of there and said, like, I'd rather be somewhere where maybe I could do something concrete for these people. And, and that seemed like, maybe in the courtroom, that would be the way to help. So.
Thank you. I can't help but ask, as we sort of reach the close here. So what are you working on now?
Yeah. So I'm working on a new novel. It actually has no law in it at the moment at all. And as you say, it's kind of liberating. Like, I kind of feel like, will I come back to writing about law? Probably, because it really is what I know. But this is a mother-daughter story, and I'm enjoying getting into the weeds of their relationship and trying to figure out how they each can grow and not kill each other. So yeah, and that's what I'm working on now.
For any of your family who may be listening, it's fiction.
Oh, it's fiction. It's very fiction, very much so.
I'm a civil procedure professor, and we have a broad definition of relevance. I'm sure that when that one's out, we can find some way to bring you back on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Even if there aren't case citations in it. Is there, anything else that you feel like, we didn't cover, or you'd like to add to, or to anything that we've talked about?
No, I feel like we talked about a lot. It was a good discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Reyna, for taking the time to talk with us and to talk with the listeners of the Law Review podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.